The government is very clear that this is one sector which is bound to create more innovation, more job opportunities, and ultimately could be a catalyst towards the national economic growth. However, having said that, it's important to understand that this sector also is seeing a lot of regulation or a lot of misuse. So, what's required is that at least the misuse needs to be regulated. If you're doing a normal gaming, which is not gambling, it's perfectly legal. Please go ahead and do that. The government is supporting you. But yes, the government says if you're doing any gaming which is tantamounting to gambling, then that's something that's not going to be permitted thanks to this new law. However, there is no law in the country which looks at the addiction elements of gaming. There's no law in the country which goes ahead and talks anything about self harm games. These are games which are initially couched or camouflaged as normal games, but ultimately have a one point agenda, which is to go ahead and ultimately cause self harm to the users, ultimately glorifying suicide or end of human life. Now, those kind of games, I believe, need to be regulated. Why? Because you cannot have these online self harm games to be instrumentality for causing harm to Indian users. And it's there, I think, that there's a kind need for a new legislation in this regard. Till such time a legislation comes up, it's necessary that the government must also stipulate minimum due diligence parameters for these self harm game service providers, because all these game service providers become intermediaries under Section 21W of the Information Technology Act. Under Section 79 of the IT Act, these intermediaries are required to exercise due diligence while they discharge their obligations under the law. But the parameters of due diligence have not been defined. Though the government needs to be complimented for amending the Information Technology Rules 2021 in 2023 so as to include gaming intermediaries. However, specific due diligence parameters are still required to be stipulated in the context of self harm games. That's one. Number two, while there's a need for a new law and while the law will come in, there's also a need for enforcing whatever limited applicable provisions of existing law are there in an effective manner. But more significantly, we will have to empower the Indian users, the Indian youth, by creating more awareness, sensitization. That's the reason I've been telling the government that you must now incorporate studies or learnings on cyberlaw, online games, AI as part of the school curriculum from the first standard onwards. Because we in India have started giving devices to children at very young ages. So, and these children at young ages are only playing online games. Now, we don't exactly know how these online games are ultimately going to have an impact upon the psyche and the mindset of the users. And therefore, the entire issue of addiction of games needs to be looked at from a legal standpoint. Why? Because if you're looking at voluntary self regulation, that's not going to happen. And voluntary self regulation will invariably fail. Why? Because ultimately, these games, including online self harm games, are ultimately generating monies for companies. And why should they go ahead and stop the revenue shares? Till such time, there's actually force of law behind a legal provision, it's not going to be followed. And that's why there's a need for coming up with penal consequences for companies should they not go ahead and fulfill the mandate that's given by the government. At the end of the day, the government also has a responsibility for ensuring the safety and the security of the gaming users, that they should not play games at the cost or expense of losing their lives. There's also a need for stipulating parameters so that these online self harm games do not indoctrinate or brainwash the users to such a level that they stop using their cognitive thinking capabilities and start believing whatever these online self harm games are saying to be absolutely correct. So I believe a lot of work needs to be done. Everybody needs to come to contribute in this regard, but I believe the family has to play a primary role. Don't wait for the law because the law will take some time. Don't wait for existing law to be enforced because it may still take time. But at least if you are part of families, it's your bounden duty to ensure that no member of the family gets sucked into this whirlpool of AI accountability, of these entire issue of these online games and their self harm addiction. Why? Because ultimately, if you start talking about these to your family members, at least you will start beginning to sensitize them, beginning to empower them. Also, it will be imperative that please don't use danda, please don't use force, because this generation will not use the force. You start imposing things on them and they'll just switch off. Better thing will be to help them sensitize the negative ramifications of these self harm games. And also, if they still don't agree, go ahead and disconnect your internet connectivity at home. Please disrupt your online router so that the internet connectivity is not available, so that the children can then be dissuaded from playing these kind of games. It'll be good if we can encourage them to start using some of the constructive elements of life, like having good hobbies, good outside activities, so that they can channelize their thought processes better. But for that, everybody will have to contribute, and family will have to play an important role.